Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Very happy to be joined by Maria Andersen, who's the CEO of a company called Coursetune. We're going to get into all manner of instructional design activity and course schematics and all that good stuff. Maria, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Maria and I met as part of a new weekly live cast that I've launched with Dr. Terry Gibbons, who's fantastic. We had Maria on as one of our first guests to talk about Coursetune, and it was such a great conversation that I wanted to go deeper and bring Maria on to Trending in Education. We like to begin our conversations by getting our guests to tell us their origin story, what got you to where you are in your career, and why would an audience who likes to know what's new and emerging in learning and education, what could they get from understanding your story? So in your own words, Maria, what got you to where you are these days?
This is a complicated story, I think. I was, from the get-go, not very good at deciding on a distinct career path. So my undergraduate education, I actually got 3 degrees in math, chemistry, and biology.
Wow.
Mostly because I couldn't decide, and somewhat because I was too close to getting a degree and didn't have enough credit, so I had to do at least 2.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of laid the foundation for seeing a broad amount of curriculum, because I saw the full curriculum for 3 different subjects, right?
Yep.
And then when I went to grad school, I actually saw 3 more sets of curriculum. I started in chemical engineering and then left that program. So I did a full year of engineering. And then I started working on an MBA, which I did finish. And halfway, maybe like a semester or 2 into my MBA, I decided that what I really wanted was a master's in math. So then I saw the graduate curriculum for math as well.
Wow.
And I did that because I wanted to teach math. So I did go and teach math for 10 years as a professor at a community college.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I spent a lot of time working with faculty on how to teach better, specifically through the guise of how to teach online better.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran workshops every summer for faculty to come from across the country and learn how to teach math online.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of technical involvement there to learn how to do all of the different aspects of math online, from the graphs to the math to the captions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to do it well, to be able to engage the students, still have connection and good communication and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to start seeing like the problems of the whole math community, the whole nation. And towards the end of my career at the community college, I started doing more general workshops on learning analytics and social media and cognitive learning and things like that. So expanding into a larger audience than just math.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from there to work at Instructional, worked at Canvas for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And spent my time there mostly working on their Canvas network platform, which was to deliver massive open online courses, or MOOCs.
Yes.
And that was really interesting from an instructional design perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already branched out into seeing like a wider perspective of lots of curriculum, because I was doing more general workshops for people and having to troubleshoot their needs. But with Canvas Network, we needed to launch like 40 classes in 6 months with different schools and all of them and different topics. So we had to design good online courses for all those different topics for an audience of thousands.
Yeah.
That was engaging, that used the platform. And so every week we launched a couple more, and it was like a new experiment. We'd see what worked, what didn't work, and tweak the next week's launches. And so it was like a rapid fail, rapid succeed type experience with launching those 40 courses and with QAing, doing the quality assurance of the 40 courses and working with the faculty and developing our own rubric for what was good and what was needed improvement.
Yep.
And so that was like I would say a little bit of a trial by fire to instructional design as a discipline. And I left that to work at Area 9 Labs, which was a company that did the adaptive learning for McGraw-Hill's products. So there it was like a different education in instructional design, because now it was like more of curriculum architecture, but architecture for an adaptive learning platform. And so it was like another kind of look at how we can architect curriculum down to very granular detail. And you could see the struggle that faculty had in understanding how that all worked and how the system would work. And how you could link learning materials and assessment materials to those really granular, I would call them almost sub skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then my final job before Coursetune was working as the director of learning design for Western Governors University.
Mm-hmm.
And there I worked with our entire team of instructional designers and learning experience designers. We worked across all of the colleges at WGU on all of the curriculum there. We worked with 108 different vendors at the time that were delivering courseware for the different programs. And so each platform had its own unique challenges. Each team, each curriculum had its own unique challenges. So I spent a lot of time working on IT curriculum and allied health, nursing curriculum.
Yeah, you're drinking from several different fire hoses across your career. They all seem like they're very industry leading, but scaling and just inundated with the breadth of the domain.
Yeah, that was I had done MOOCs, and this was like another scale there because, or another cut of it, because at WGU, the content was self-paced.
Right.
And so students start and stop at any time, move at whatever pace they want to.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of really unique problems in curriculum design.
Yeah.
Who's accessing old curriculum? Who's accessing new curriculum?
Yep.
What's in the curriculum? And people kept, coming in to our workshops and asking, like, what software do you use to organize your curriculum? And like, we were doing it in a self-made database that was universally confusing to most of our users. And you worked at Kaplan, so maybe you had something similar there.
Yeah.
And spreadsheets and documents. Inevitably, they would all be out of sync with each other. And we had situations where entire curriculums were lost because a SharePoint drive got disconnected as somebody quit. And you would just lose institutional knowledge of the curriculum with everybody that left the college. And I just kept thinking there's got to be a way to capture more of this institutional knowledge and centralize where the curriculum is located, make a place where it's truly easy to understand what's in your curriculum, how it works together, how it links to your learning activities and your assessment activities, see gaps in your curriculum, look for bloat in your curriculum, like all of those things. There's got to be a better way to do this. And so when I left WGU, myself and my two co-founders created Coursetune to do that, to have a truly new way to target curriculum design that is made for curriculum design, not for the financial industry, not for the IT nerds who like to look at databases, but for the actual group of people doing the work in instructional design, curriculum design, faculty who want something they could understand.
Yeah. And then that, I think, leads you to where you are today as the CEO of Coursetune. And we're going to get into this in a bit, but it's been a tumultuous, transformative year for everyone, but certainly for a company, an organization that's very much focused on instructional designers and online learning. 2020 must have been a truly transformative year in that respect, where, this work's been going on for quite some time. You mentioned Canvas, which is an industry-leading LMS, which you worked at. You mentioned Western Governors University, which is an industry-leading online university with a great mission. Those are really interesting areas of experience for you, for folks who are well-versed in online learning and instructional design and all these types of things. But a lot of people had managed their way through the 21st century without really leaning into instructional design. And then 2020 has happened. And I'd love to get a little bit of perspective from you on what 2020's been like. Obviously, it's been traumatic, and we empathize with anyone who's lost any family or anyone who's facing economic hardships, having trouble with their jobs. But we also like to understand the perspective of folks who are leading organizations through this transformative year. What's it been like for you, and what's it been like for folks who are interested in online learning and instructional design?
I think we first experienced much the same as a lot of companies, which was a sudden change in engagement with customers, whether it's up or down. I actually have not been able yet to think of an industry that did not get affected by the pandemic. And so we first experienced the same shock to the industry that most of education experienced, where everybody froze their budgets, froze their decision making,
Mm-hmm.
just struggled to get through the March, April, May months,
Yep.
as their whole system flipped upside down to online and remote teaching for,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the schools who already were online teaching probably didn't experience much of a shock.
Yeah.
But I think for the rest of the colleges, it was a pretty big shock.
Yep.
And so we experienced that, just a lot of folks. And then we kind of started to see it as an opportunity because we figured that schools and faculty would both become a lot more interested in what's in the design of their course.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to have a good online experience if there's no design to it.
Sure.
You would have to basically architect an entire design for an entire semester in your head.
Yeah.
And we also started to see this recognition from faculty that maybe there was too much in their courses. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't possibly teach all of this in an
Right.
online format.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you teaching it in a face-to-face format? But suddenly when you have to actually post video lectures and
Mm-hmm.
make assignments and
Mm-hmm.
like put everything into courseware, it starts to be very overwhelming. You think it was probably overwhelming for the students too.
Yep.
You just lost the luxury of being able to say, do the work. And so we were starting to see this kind of mind opening of faculty to the idea that they might need to focus their courses on the most important topics, like what we might call the course objectives,
Yep. Yep.
and to reduce some of the bloat. And so we decided in May to actually launch a faculty-facing version of Coursetune called Course Plan.
Mm-hmm.
And this allows faculty to use the course planning features of Coursetune without having all of the additional
Mm-hmm.
features that an institution would want or a program would want, like
Right.
the ability to map to program outcomes and institutional outcomes and see
Yep.
connections across the curriculum. And so we did a very rapid development change to get a course plan built and implemented on our website and out the door, so that any faculty member who wanted to start having better tools for planning their curriculum architecture would be able to access the power of the visualizations and abilities that Coursetune would provide.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of our big kind of pivots to address that particular aspect of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now what we're seeing is a lot of institutions paying more attention now to, hey, what is actually in our curriculum? It's always been interesting to me. I started studying learning analytics more than a decade ago, and it always bothered me that we were talking about learning analytics, but very few faculty could actually list the learning objectives of their courses. They might have the course objectives that the department set, but very few could list the learning objectives in their courses. How do you measure learning via learning analytics if nobody knows what the students are supposed to be learning?
Right.
It doesn't make sense. And so I think what we've seen in the last decade is mostly attendance analytics, or what I would call click analytics. We have all sorts of graphs and charts about what students click on in courses in the LMS. Most LMS analytics are scores and clicks. But scores and clicks don't actually tell me the exact things a student knows or has learned, right?
Right.
And we won't ever get there if faculty don't know what students are learning in courses. Ideally, you should never create a learning activity or an assessment activity unless you know what you're targeting in those activities. And so one of the things we focused on when we were designing Coursetune was a structure that kind of pushes you towards good design as you build. So you can't add a learning activity or an assessment activity unless you first link it to learning objectives. So you can't just say, I want a discussion every week. You have to say, okay, what learning objectives do I want to cover in this discussion in week 1? What learning objectives do I want to cover in this discussion in week 2? Because if all we're doing is saying, there'll be a discussion every week, and we don't know what we're focusing on, then they tend to start to be busy work. Like, we're just having a discussion for the sake of having a discussion. There's no reason it has to be that way. You can have a discussion for the sake of a discussion that also includes real learning for students.
Well, and I think there is something to be said for tacit knowledge. So there is some implicit understanding that faculty who have taught these courses for years have, and frequently it's based on some books or papers. So like there's an annotated bibliography perhaps, or at least a bibliography, there's a syllabus, but
To the
they're not.
textbook.
And a textbook, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But there's not necessarily depth beyond that. And then we have talked a lot about how 2020, in some respects, has been the year of, I ain't got time for that. So, like, on top of all the other pressures in their personal lives and the concerns that faculty might have about their own health or their economic, just their safety, their family safety, taking on additional technology burdens is something that we've heard a lot about, particularly Zoom and Zoom fatigue and the emergency remote teaching that we talked a lot about from the spring. All those things don't necessarily get at what you're getting at, which is more thoughtful design, applying design thinking to courses and getting to the micro level in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, almost like a Occam's razor of instructional thinking, where if I'm teaching this, it's in service of some intentional learning objective that is going into the course that I'm building. I'd love to get your perspective on how we help faculty get there and what other types of resources exist in organizational ecosystems who you're also designing this for, because I don't think it's faculty probably aren't going to get there alone. So I'd love to hear you flesh out how you think about the whole ecosystem out there.
Yeah. So there are some faculty who do get there on their own. They already have some kind of sense of what design architecture looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and Coursetune can help them solidify it
Mm-hmm.
as they go through the process. We typically see adoption by like a program dean or department chair who's looking to really understand what's in their curriculum across the entire student experience,
Mm-hmm.
the 4-year degree that the
Yep.
student is learning. And they want to make sure they're not over duplicating skills, leaving out skills. They
Mm-hmm.
want to align those course objectives and learning objectives and assessments
Mm-hmm.
to professional standards. And all of this becomes quite simple once you have your curriculum inside of Coursetune.
Mm-hmm.
And so we typically see adoptions by some kind of academic leader of some
Yep.
sort who sees this as a tool to really start to get at, is our whole degree designed correctly?
Mm-hmm.
As part of that, you go down to the course level.
Makes
right?
sense. Mm-hmm.
And so we often have a model where for the schools that are lucky enough to have instructional designers for the individual departments,
Right.
we typically see a partnership between the instructional designer and the faculty members, where the instructional designer will take a look at the course as it exists now. We actually do, at Coursetune, we will pull in the school's data, however it's formatted, into Coursetune so that you can start wherever you're at.
Yeah.
And see, and wherever you're at can actually vary course by course across the department. So we'll see courses that have a ton of detail in them and I have clearly a lot of thought has gone into the architecture.
Yeah.
And then we'll see courses that have a course description and that's it,
Right. Right.
in the same department. And so we pull in the data, however it looks, and then it's often the job of an instructional designer to sit down with a faculty member and really talk over, okay, here's what we're missing. How can we go about finding that? So maybe a course has no learning objectives. Okay, how can we go about finding learning objectives? Do you use a textbook? Does the textbook have any objectives in it that we could start to pull from? Is it an OER? Are there learning objectives there? Or do you have lecture outlines of what you cover? Could we get learning objectives from what you typically cover? And so we like to start with, what do you currently do? And then we go through this sorting process where we almost always end up pulling in the objectives on the layout of the course that's more by time, like how do you teach, like when do you teach things? And then we actually flip it on its head and say, here are the course objectives you say are in this course. Let's take all those learning objectives now and see if they match up to any course objective you have. And that's where it gets really interesting, because we often find it's the case that at least one course objective has no learning objectives at all. And that there are a bunch of learning objectives that do not correlate with any course objectives at all. And that either means you've got some course objectives that are wrong, or you've got some learning objectives that are just bloat and don't need to be there.
Right.
Or you may be not actually teaching something you intend to be having the students learn. Right. So I remember in my own experience of using Coursetune the first time, I pulled in one of my math classes and took a look at my course objectives versus my learning objectives and discovered, as I was doing the sorting, that I had a course objective that students should be able to analyze an answer for correctness. I think it was called reasonability. Is this answer reasonable or not? Yeah, I didn't have any learning objectives around that. So there was never a problem. There was never assessment around, is this answer reasonable or not, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we hear other disciplines say, how come they can't tell if there's not a correct answer? Actually, looking at it through that same perspective, you start to be able to have insight into the things that have not been obvious before. Like, math, we get criticized a lot for students not being able to apply what they know.
Relevance.
Relevance, or transferability to novel problems. So if you look at like math curriculum, it's typically X's and Y's and integer coefficients.
Yeah.
No chemistry class uses X's and Y's and integer coefficients.
Right.
No physics class. And so you start to realize that if this is a goal, transferability to other subject areas, then you need to make sure you have learning objectives that prepare them for re-indexing time, for using other letters as variables. It's a real thing. If they get so attached to X and Y, they can't leave it behind. They can't function when they see the same exact models in another subject area. And so you start to realize you need to change things to get that novel transferability of ideas.
Yeah, and I could see how that would be really useful to a department, even beyond a department, almost like a provost, or how do I make sure that between departments there's more interoperability and transferability, which is something that's huge really in the skills marketplace. And especially if you're in a domain like math, you want to develop some skills and competencies that are transferable and foundational, because in a lot of ways that is the justification for learning math, which is really interesting. I do like the visualization piece, and I'd love to hear a little more from you on that. We talk a lot on the show about the picture superiority effect and how if you're able to understand something using both visual and textual or semantic information, people process it more deeply. We have debunked the idea of visual learners, so you don't have to. You could do that again for us if you'd like. We'd love to hear more debunking. We'd love to debunk things, but there is research that has indicated we process information better when we can consume it in more than one modality. And there's also been, in addition to this renaissance around design thinking that sort of hits learning in every other domain that's out there, there's also this renaissance around next-gen visualizations. That sounds very central to Coursetune's value prop. Can you talk a little more about what that is and why you value it, how you think about developing the visualizations?
Sure. Just to go with your debunking idea, I don't necessarily want to debunk it, but I just thought I would add one little detail here, which is that the human brain was not made to read text. The human brain was designed to remember imagery of the world, right?
And listen to podcasts
and listen to your elders, the people around you, the people who help you. For 10,000 years, we had images of the world and listening to the people around you. For 400 years, for the general public, maybe even less for most general public, we've had text. So the idea that text is the way we learn things is ridiculous, because text is just an efficient transferal of information before we had things like video, right?
Take that, Gutenberg.
And it was a great efficient transmission of information, right? Like the Renaissance, everything comes about because we had text. But we have to stop with this idea that text is the end all be all for how we analyze things, how we remember things. I think actually there are quite a few people who don't remember easily by just reading text, where if there's an image, if there's a graphic representation of something, they can actually almost snapshot in their mind that image of where things sit on the page, because our brains were made to remember images, right?
We've talked on the show about mental athletes and memory competitions. Exactly. The method of loci and all that, which is you can connect visuals, you can anchor your memory around like a visual image more so than you can something abstract like text. So we're picking up what you're putting down, Maria.
So with that in mind, when we were looking for design for like, how would we design curriculum software? I spent quite a bit of time just sitting and looking at different graph theory, like the whole, what is his name?
Tufte, Edward Tufte?
Yeah, Tufte and all of the great visualization artists and their work. So I spent quite a bit of time just like sitting on the floor for a few days, like paging through those kinds of
Yeah.
books, looking
Yeah.
for something that we could maybe hang curriculum design on
Yeah.
to make it more real to
Hmm.
people. Now, if you think about curriculum design, when you log into an online course, everything is under menus. Everything is under
Yeah.
drop-down menus, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You never see the whole course. You might see the 8 modules in the course,
Right.
or what's in one module of the
Right.
course,
Right. Hmm.
and what's in each drop-down of that one module of the course. You never see the whole picture at once. And
Hmm.
at some point, I hit an image of a circular representation for something. And I thought, let's try that. The nice thing about a circular representation is you can essentially see everything. Whereas a linear representation, you will always have stuff that falls
Yeah.
off the
Something has
screen,
to
and
be
you have to
top
open
and
it
bottom, and
close.
yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
So we started with that. And as soon as we saw a course actually laid out that way, we were like, oh, yeah, this can work.
Hmm.
Because we have the course is the center of the circle. And then outside of the course, you have your maybe 5 to 10 course objectives, which sit, surrounding it,
Yeah.
like they're orbiting the
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
And then on each course objective, you have the learning objectives that go with the course. And as you attach things like assessments and learning activities, you're actually attaching them as arcs, almost like the tree rings of a tree
Yep.
outside of that central architecture. And so you are actually able to see the course objectives, the learning objectives, the activities, and then how it maps to skills, professional standards, program objectives, institutional objectives, all in one picture.
Yeah.
And so you can start to get a sense of what is good course design by
Hmm.
just looking at the image
Yeah.
of a course.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
If the tree rings all look really crazy and disjointed, and
Yeah.
there's 13 different levels, it's like, this course is too complicated. Students
Hmm.
are not going to understand it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Figure out how to reduce it from 13 rings around the tree to like maybe 6 rings around
Right.
the tree
Right.
by renaming activities, by
Hmm.
creating more structure. We can all now like just take a look at the way a course looks and
Yeah.
have a pretty good idea of what's done, what's not done,
Yeah.
what's probably good design, what might be bad design.
Hmm.
Um,
It's like looking at like a medical professional looking at an X-ray or an MRI. By
Yeah.
now, you've seen enough of these where you can type the course design based on the visualization, and you're relatively early. We didn't get into that, but like you're 3 years in, you were saying, in
Yeah.
terms of Coursetune. So like you're still gathering information so that you can start understanding those trends. But for those of you who are neck deep in this, living and breathing it, you're becoming domain experts in terms of this stuff. Are you doing research about the efficacy, and like how do folks out there in the world understand that how this works and that it's more effective? It sounds like a very persuasive case. You're relatively early on, so you may not have the enough research yet to validate it, but I would be curious your plans around measuring, almost applying the same type of thinking you were talking about before to the efficacy of Coursetune as a platform. Have you done thinking about that?
We provide the software that lets people do careful architecture for their curriculum, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then the efficacy comes around, does a careful architecture lead to improved student outcomes?
Right.
And that is going to vary so much from school to school.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little hard for us to measure the efficacy. So we are to a great extent relying on existing research that shows that good organization results in better student outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That making sure that your assessment and learning is well aligned leads to good student outcomes, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That mapping to program outcomes leads to solid degrees for students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so to some extent, we have to rely on the research done in education itself
Yep.
that links the curriculum architecture to the efficacy at that school.
Right.
Coursetune is a way to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it will not solve your architecture problems for you. We're not,
Right.
It's not magic.
And it makes sense, though. It may help the more advanced course designers, the way you were describing it, faculty who already are very thoughtful in their design intent. But it's more a way to level up the entirety of an organization so that you have the basic tooling you need to apply design thinking to your pedagogy, really. Like your entire course design can be more thoughtful. It's almost using the Adobe Creative Suite to make great design outputs is something that designers just know that they really need to rely on those tools to be effective. In some ways, this is a corollary on the instructional side. Makes a lot of sense. I did want to make sure we get a chance to get your perspective on what other trends you're seeing out in the world around us. But before we go there, any other final thoughts before we get your perspective on new trends that are emerging in the world around us?
I think my final thought, at least on Coursetune, is
Mm-hmm.
that one day the pandemic's going to be over.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's quite sure what day it is, but
Mm-hmm.
hopefully sooner than later.
Yep.
And when that happens, you are going to get hit by the things that we've been putting off because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things that we've been putting off a little bit in education is really designing for the new workforce and the new
Yep.
jobs that are coming, and the
Mm-hmm.
retraining people who are going to be losing their jobs.
Yep.
And as the pandemic is going, AI in the workplace has not slowed down
Sure.
at all. I would say,
Right.
if anything, it's sped up, because
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that having human beings do some of this work
Yep.
is not medically safe. And so more and more companies are like, hey, can we have a computer
Yeah.
loaded with artificial intelligence do this work instead of a human?
Yeah.
Well, then let's do that. It might
Mm-hmm.
even be cheaper than hiring a human. So on the other side of this pandemic, when we're done with dealing with the medical issues, I think we're going to have a real issue with loss of jobs that aren't coming back, needing
Yep.
to retrain
Mm-hmm.
humans to do different kinds of work, more skilled work
Yep.
a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and to quickly flex into different kind of jobs and be able to teach how to work with AI software,
Yeah.
which most schools, I would say, probably are not ready to support.
Right.
And to do that quickly at the end of this pandemic, you're going to have to start by knowing what's in your curriculum. You need to
Yeah.
be able to remix your curriculum into new degree programs, new certificates.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there are a lot of people who are thinking to themselves, I lost my job, I think I'll go back to school for a 4-year degree.
Right.
I just don't think we live in that luxury anymore. You
Right.
have too many adults
Mm-hmm.
who have, we like to talk about the some education, no degree
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
And colleges just have to get better at faster paths to something that lets a person level up,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So whether that's making sure we actually give associates on the way to bachelor's, associates that allow you to level up in your field,
Yep.
to get a slightly better paying job, to get a job that can support a family,
Mm-hmm.
on the way to a bachelor's, so that you don't have to wait 4 years for
Yeah.
that better job.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you just have to wait 2 semesters or 4 semesters for that
Yeah.
better job. And that every course is doing its best to teach real life skills,
Mm-hmm.
not just what you need for the next class.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think now is the time to look at your curriculum and ask yourself, with every class, what does a student leave this class being able to do that can help them get a promotion, get a raise, get something,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I now look at my math classes and say, I want a student to leave this class being able to do more at work than they used to be able to do,
Yeah.
to be able to analyze data better than they used to be able to do,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look at graphs and data in the news with more of a critical eye than they've
Yep.
had before,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? To know when they're being duped.
Right. Yeah. Like
You
fake
know?
math. Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that was
Absolutely.
not the goal of this math class 10 years ago.
Right.
It was to prepare students for calculus.
Mm-hmm. And just to reinforce that point, it's not just true in higher ed. This is true in K-12. It's true in workforce development, lifelong learning, reskilling, outskilling, upskilling are all topics we've talked a lot about. So if you're more in the corporate world and learning and development in that space, the same problems apply. And Coursetune, we were talking while we were prepping, it's not just for higher ed. It's really for higher ed, K-12, lifelong learning and development, workforce development. Because the future of work, to your point, is going to be really different in terms of the skills that are needed than what went into the original course design for higher ed, which dates back now 600-700 years to Bologna and other academies across the world. Really interesting time and really fascinating time. And it sounds like a lot of the tools that Coursetune is building are certainly relevant to folks who are trying to just wrap their head around all this and get some perspective. Speaking of perspective, though, we did want to hear from you. Anything else that's out there in the world that is capturing your attention these days that you think folks who are trying to stay ahead of trends and care about learning in the future, anything that's capturing your imagination that you want to share with our listeners?
Ooh, capturing the imagination. I am spending a lot of time looking at AI and implications of AI for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Also robotics, which I
Hmm.
think is coming along at quite a fast clip, and learning robotics, learning algorithms, things like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'm actually fairly optimistic about how education is going to come out of this.
Hmm.
I think that education got a boost about a decade forward in time. To have trained all faculty to be able to teach remotely
Yeah.
under normal circumstances would have taken us 10 years.
Yep.
A lot of teeth pulling
Hmm.
and a lot of resistance.
Hmm.
I think that we are going to leave this pandemic with instructors and faculty having skills they didn't previously have,
Hmm.
which is going to benefit students ultimately, because
Yeah.
students have always had reasons they had to miss classes.
Yeah.
They have always had broken cars and
Right.
sick kids
Yeah. Yeah.
and days they couldn't make it to class,
Hmm.
where they missed a bus or they just couldn't drag themselves out of bed because of anxiety or something. And the ability we now have to record a live class,
Yeah.
we've had that ability for a long time. Almost every faculty member and instructor now knows how to record a live class,
Yep.
how to bring somebody into class remotely. I mean,
Hmm.
even if they're teaching in the classroom right now,
Yep.
they have students in quarantine
Yeah. Right.
and they have to deal with those
Hmm.
students.
Hmm.
And I think that the ultimate result is going to be that we are able to serve students better on the
Yeah.
other side, because students will know these things are possible and instructors will know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge leap forward for
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, yeah. So that is an element of hope. I agree with you. I think the related point is that the issues around access inequities are also much more front and center. So
Oh, yeah.
for online learning. So I
Yeah.
think assuming that we can power through the pain of those gaps and figure out how to open up those new modes of access, digital inclusion is the term that we talked a lot about on the show as a like a macro trend that really has been accelerated by the pandemic, awareness of these gaps. But hopefully elevating the awareness of that will make it easier for everyone to access online learning. Once that happens, once we're able to bridge there, I think there's huge upside to your point around many of the benefits of online learning. And then to bring it back to Coursetune, it does seem like tools like what you've built at Coursetune are going to be essential to help folks navigate what was already a complex universe. How do you make it a little simpler to understand? How do you have tools that are enabling instructional designers and faculty members to be better at what they do? That's a lot of what Coursetune is about. If folks want to learn more about Coursetune or any of this stuff, where should they go?
Coursetune.com, Coursetune.
There you go. And Maria Andersen, thank you very much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, if you like what you're hearing, tell a friend, share the episode, write a lovely review somewhere, and grab someone else's phone and download it for them. Do whatever you need to do to get the word out there. We're trying to understand what's emerging in the world of learning. Thanks for listening to Trending in Education.